Welcome to another episode of the Black Gems Dive In podcast. We are super excited to be back for another episode. I am flying solo. My co-host is enjoying a little event, and so we're going to let her enjoy that, but we're going to come back with an episode because we said we're going to be consistent this year, right? So I'm super excited. We're going to actually introduce our guest, Sheldon Anderson, who is the CEO of Publicflower. Publicflower is adult use cannabis dispensary located here in Allentown, New York, right? And it's actually the first Black-owned dispensary in Buffalo. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit, talk about his story and getting to this point. But before we do that, y'all know we got to dive into a hot topic, right? And so the hot topic, Sheldon's going to actually join me in that. And so the hot topic we're going to talk about comes from an article from NPR. It's 5 takeaways from President Biden's State of the Union address. We know that just happened last week. And there's a lot of conversations around what's happening, just in the state of the world right now as it relates to the United States and what's next, right? And so in the article, it talks about 5 different spaces that he touched on. First and foremost, he took Trump on extensively. He talked about the policies of his predecessor, talking about, just the differences in terms of his presidency and what Biden is really focused on now. He leaned into issues around abortion, gun control, tax hikes on the wealthy, but he also attempted to challenge Republicans in the chamber. And it was really interesting because they talk about how it felt kind of like a political convention. I know there were folks that actually had some political attire on, which is not really legal. I don't think you're supposed to do that.
Yeah, they had some hats.
Some hats. We definitely saw some hats that were being worn during that time. But hey, I think one of the biggest things that they talked about was just the energy in the room and the amount of energy that President Biden had as he talked about just the differences in terms of what he wants to focus on if he's elected to a second term. The second one was reproductive rights, and that being at the forefront. We know that because Roe v. Wade was struck down, there's a lot of conversations across the states around what that should look like. Even some states that introduced new bills. I wanted to say, was it Alabama recently that there was a bill around in vitro fertilization, and so conversations around that. And he basically warned Congress around a national abortion ban if he doesn't win this term. Yep. And we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I think to one of the first points you mentioned about one of the lawmakers wearing political attire.
Yeah,
I think to make it a local issue, that's like if you go to your common council or your school board meeting and you see someone who's elected wearing their campaign attire in an official capacity. It's just not something you see because, I'm not an attorney or anything like that, but I know that you have like the Hatch Act and you have certain,
right.
You got public officers law, things like that, like, campaign and, government, just generally just aren't supposed to be, just has to have a certain distance, at least arm's length or something.
Right.
But the idea that you can just have political attire in Congress is just wild to me.
Right.
I just wanted to provide, your
context.
audience, some
Absolutely,
context.
absolutely. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Third, Biden made the case for why his economic policies are working. I think that's been really under fire lately, right? People feeling the impacts of things like inflation, the cost of gas, the cost of food going up. And I know some of that has kind of settled a little bit, but there are notions that might rise again. He argued that the state of the country was far worse when Trump was in office, citing that the pandemic triggered things like job losses, millions of deaths, and mental health crisis, and isolation and loneliness, which is a pandemic in itself. There's a lot of conversations around what that looked like. And so different bills that he said, listen, I'd be willing to pass some of these bills if they came to my desk. But I think Congress has had a lot of difficulty in getting to that point just because there hasn't been much bipartisan conversations lately. And so one of the things that he talked about was just the record, right? He outlined his own record, pulled out stats around real world projects that are funded through his top legislative accomplishments, a healthcare and climate bill, which was passed without a single GOP vote, and the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which has gotten a lot of conversation, at least even locally, I would say, around that infrastructure bill and what that might look like. Another point was lowering the cost of insulin for seniors, which would be $35 a month through Medicare. And he vowed in his second term to extend that cap for all those who needed insulin. And then the border security was another big conversation that provoked a really large response from the GOP. And, when you're watching these, it's split right down the middle, right?
Yep.
So you can see which side is really, you know,
one side claps, one side doesn't.
exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of like a uniform. I remember watching like during like I think Clinton's like first term. I can't remember what grade I was in. It might have been 5th or 6th or something. I could be wrong on the years, but
Yeah.
I remember like, you know, current event assignment, watch the State of the Union. And
Okay.
like, you know, that's one thing I remember is like, you know, whatever team was in charge was
the one that was the loudest, right?
You know, they right, yeah, and you know, the person who was at the podium could say no wrong. And then obviously just, I remember one thing was during President Obama's presidency, that one situation where somebody basically jeered him.
And said you lied,
yeah,
right?
you lied, yeah. So,
yeah.
you know, it's definitely been strange over the years. I don't really, I know that there had to have been incidences during Trump's presidency, but yeah, it's definitely not as orderly as it used to. And then now you have social media, so it's kind of like one of those things where if I'm congressperson, congresswoman, and I'm struggling in my polls, I know the State of the Union, I can do something, wear a hat, you know.
And get noticed for that, right?
And I get the clip, and then if I see the president, I can, you know, give him a stern look, and that's going to make me then, I'm going to put that picture in some emails and try to rep crowd, you know. So, you know, there's a lot of gamesmanship, and you know, that's been increased, and I think social media probably fuels that because you can get a little viral clip, and then it's going to be on CNN the whole night.
Right. Exactly.
And you were talking about too, like the response, the GOP response to the State of the Union. That's been a big thing. And I remember, what was this guy's name? Marco Rubio. I remember his. I remember he had like a famous one. The reason I remember the Marco Rubio one is because the one he took like the weirdest drink of. He drank some water and he like looked like such like a robot drinking water. That's why I remember. That's like the only GOP response I remember.
Yeah.
Because of his robotic way of drinking water. But yeah, no, it's interesting. You know, they all try to position themselves as like who's going to be the next GOP
front
leader.
runner in terms of, you know, running mate potentially too. There's a lot of conversations around that.
Yep.
Before we get into that response, because you know there's a lot of conversations around Congresswoman Katie Britt. Right, and her response to the State of the Union. We'll talk about that. The last thing that was noted in this NPR article was that Biden addressed the critics of the Mideast policy, right, and stepped up criticism of Israeli leaders. And that was something that we've been hearing a lot in terms of supporters of Biden and, you know, people who are not in support of Biden saying, where is the response? You know, why haven't you said anything around a ceasefire immediately? And what has the conversation been like? And so there's been a lot of supporters on his side who have called him to the carpet and saying, we're not going to vote for you unless you're stepping up the conversation around that.
Yeah, I mean, the Middle East, like, for example, myself personally, I know that when I was in high school, I went to high school in New York City, in Brooklyn, New York, and we had, you know, people that came from Israel that their family were served in the Israeli army, sitting next to Palestinian immigrants who came from like refugee camps.
Okay.
And I remember, you know, at the time I didn't realize it, but you have a public school, high school teacher trying to mitigate an intense debate.
Interesting.
And so there's a lot of passions on both sides,
right.
and it's not a laughing matter. I just think it's like, you know, I don't think people really have a strong appreciation, you know, for the passion on both sides of it. And obviously I'm not going to make any determinations of either who's right or who's wrong, but I think it's just a level of, you have to appreciate people's thoughts and feelings about it, and it's definitely a nuanced, complicated matter.
For sure.
And it's not even just in, you know, obviously, it's State of the Union, but, you know, I think I was seeing something online, Prime Minister, you know, England was talking about it. And so, you know, no, I think it was the mayor of London. I could be wrong.
Okay.
You know, they were talking about, you know, some of the nuanced issues.
Yeah.
But that's one thing I remember vividly. And you even see it now. Like, we'll have protests in Buffalo.
Absolutely.
Pro-Palestine.
Absolutely.
You know, pro-Israel protest. And obviously I think that's amplified with social media.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was in high school from like 2006 to 2009. And so social media was not as prevalent. And so, yeah, I definitely think it's something that where people are gonna. It's not gonna be an issue that goes away. And obviously, it's been there's been Cold War issue. You know, hasn't been as hot as it is now, and obviously the loss of life is tragic. And so I think you know, more and more people are gonna have a stronger appreciation. I'm glad that, you know, President Biden has kind of come out more
and
strongly
saying something strongly. Yeah.
But I think he has to. Number two, you're getting closer to the election time, so he has to kind of really, you know, draw his line.
And that's interesting in itself because, you know, the nuance that you brought around that positioning. There's been a lot of organizations who we've worked with, you know, at my company around how do you position this? Because folks having very strong feelings, you know, on either side of that spectrum around this war and what that looks like. And so there's been conversations around how do you navigate when to say something, when not to say something, and really having some strong conversations around supporting staff through this, right? And so we'll touch on that at some point, you know, just around some strategies potentially that people can think about as it relates to these issues that can be polarizing and you know, how an organization might approach that. But the last thing I did want to talk to you about as it relates to this hot topic is just that response by Katie Britt, right? The congressperson. And so, you know, she gets on there, she has a kitchen in the background, you know, and just the positioning has been really interesting because everyone is really fighting for what they talk about, the women's vote, right? And what the impacts of that might look like. And so she breaks down the State of the Union address and talks specific to, honestly, there were points where she was just talking directly to women and talking about raising families and the fear of what's happening in the country around us. And it was very interesting because when you look at some of the feedback around what her, you know, her response was, it was like the emotions that you can see her kind of go through. So at moments, you know, she's really energized and charged, but then other moments she's getting really stern around, you know, some of the fear in the border situation and what's happening. She touched on basically bringing life into the world, but primarily around, I think, IVF, right? In vitro. She didn't talk about the abortion ban specific in that, right? And so a lot of people criticized it and said, like, was she acting? It felt kind of more acting like. The response when you talk about Marco Rubio and that one was just really interesting. And I know it was actually parodied on
SNL, right?
SNL, right? Right. And so what do you know, what are your thoughts around that response? And
I mean, yeah, if SNL is parodying, you know, your response, you didn't, you know, knock it out the park. You didn't, you know, if you did a good enough job, you know, showing the Republican or the counterpoint.
Right, the counterpoint.
You know, SNL is a more, you know, left progressive leaning, you know, media platform. And so, you know, if you have a strong GOP response, it's tough to parody it, you know. But I think, you know, her positioning, you know, she's definitely within her right to have passion, you know, behind. But I think what's unfortunate is it's tough to argue against the policies, you know, when they're in place. And you look at polling data, it's not supported by the majority of women. Right. And no matter how passionately you argue for it, whether it's a Republican in a skirt or a Republican in a pantsuit or a Republican in just regular shirt and tie, you know, that's what matters at the end of the day is the policies. And what freedoms are you increasing or decreasing for women. And, you know, reproductive rights and things like that. I mean, like, people have, on both sides, spent decades, generations.
Exactly.
And, you know, you're seeing a little bit of the, you know, successes for, you know, people who are, you know, more pro-life, but at the same time, you know, I think ultimately it's tough. I feel like when it's the State of the Union during an election year, you're going to see a lot more theatrics and show. And so I think what's interesting is no matter what, I think obviously, you know, President Trump, he was all about theatrics and shows. But when you think about, well, what policies have you actually moved across the finish line and actually got done? That's where it's like, I kind of think about more of the conversation. I mean, you know, with President Trump, I mean, mostly the tax bill that he passed, and that was about it. Other executive orders and things of that nature. But, you know, let's assume, you know, the person who did the response, let's assume that they become president, right? You know, what can you actually get done? You know, and so I think, you know, no matter if you know, again, there's definitely it's a fine line that an elected official has to walk, but definitely as a woman, I can see that. For example, I think it was Fiorina. She ran for president. I can't remember her first name, but I'm good with last names sometimes. But I remember it was a big debate on CNN when she was on the debate stage. I think it was in 2016 or it was 2016. And because she was as she was getting lower in the polls, she started speaking more and more directly to women. And then, like, one thing she started wearing, she wore a cross on her neck, and a necklace, like a very large, like, cross, right? And then, like, they were like making the point that, like, She was trying to really lean in because it's tough. Like from if you're a female elected official, you're trying to strike the balance that you can speak to men and women. But I think, again, I just go back to the policies. Like I feel like if Republicans are giving policies that aren't helpful to women on overall, and then to have women come out there and speak passionately about it and try to defend policies that are actually hurtful. I mean, that's a tough circle to square.
It's a tough sell for sure.
Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting to watch kind of what happens after this, and obviously it's an election year, so I'm sure we're gonna have lots to talk about as it relates to policies, legislation, what's happening in that area.
This is gonna be an interesting election.
It sure will.
It always is. I mean, like I joke around with my nephews all the time. Keep up with your current events, but you have a potential Republican nominee that has 50 lawsuits.
Right.
You have, normally it's just like Super Tuesday. You get through like those different like primary states and things like that, and you can kind of track it that way. But who knows? Who really knows, right? Like to your point, it'll be a very interesting year, and we'll be following through that, and so we'll have some more conversations to come as it relates to all things election for this year. Yes,
for sure.
It's an important election for sure. Not to definitely don't want to downplay that. It's definitely important to vote, get registered to vote.
Right.
If you never voted before, if you're 17, turning 18, make sure you register to vote. Make
Absolutely.
sure that you tell a friend to ensure that they vote, whether you want to vote independent, Democrat, Republican, whatever. So make sure you vote and your voice is counted.
Right. Absolutely. So we're going to shift gears a little bit because we want to talk about your background. I know you used to work in the politics arena for some time. And it's really interesting because we talked a little bit about this before we started, around like the full circle moment of where you've been, currently what you're doing and what you got going on. And so I want to give you just an opportunity to talk about yourself, your background, what you're currently doing, and then we'll talk a little bit about the nuances around like the legislation and how. And we actually talked about this on the podcast before, but with Majority Leader People Stokes, who used to work for, brought the bill to New York State, and that's passed, and now we have adult use recreationally in New York State. So tell the people a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in this, and why you decided to get involved in it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. Again, my name is Sheldon, CEO of Publicflower. It's an adult use dispensary in the city of Buffalo, located in Allentown's historic neighborhood. Allentown is a historical neighborhood, part of the Federal Register. And I originally, one of the things I always talk about, Mariah and I, we met in college, and Mariah's at the time, she wasn't my fiance, but now she's my fiance. I actually worked on campaigns for elected officials in New York City, specifically for the New York State Assembly. And one of my great friends who I've known, she's known me since I was like 3 years old, was like, hey, I'm doing these campaigns, this is a good opportunity. And I expressed a little bit of interest, and then we kind of just like, we started, working the campaigns together. And fast forward, came to Buffalo for school. And one of the things that I noticed was, I started off in engineering initially, but then I switched over to communications. I got a job basically as an internship for one state agency, Empire State Development, for a couple months. After that, I was able to work for Assemblymember People Stokes. She wasn't the majority leader at the time, and that was for the 141st Assembly District. And I remember, some of our early conversations, just, I was interested in government, policy work, and then also having that experience on the campaign side. And I think also that when I first started, I think it was a campaign year for her as well. So it kind of was like a natural fit there. And I think I started there in 2014. In 2014. I'm not sure the specific year that the MRTA passed. I want to say 2020, 2021, I believe.
I think it was I think it was 21.
Yeah. And so when I left the office in 2017, and I currently work, my full-time job is with New York State Department of Transportation. And, so I'm still actively, in government. One of the things that I remember was just some of the, not necessarily the negotiations, but just the conversations about regulation and taxation, and just ultimately bringing the adult use market into New York State, but leading it with equity. And that was huge. I mean, I don't believe myself, other card licensees would be here if it was not for Assembly Majority Leader People Stokes, Senator Liz Kruger, And obviously Governor Cuomo at the time, you know, ultimately signed the law, but you know, there was a lot of conversations for at least 5 to 10 years. I remember, you know, being in the assembly member's office, and you know, people were super passionate about the potential for this opportunity. And New York has done a great job in leading with equity. I think 40% of the licensees are either minority or women. No other state can say that. And so, you know, I definitely applaud, you know, the Office of Cannabis Management for the work that they've done.
And she mentioned specifically that she would vote against her own bill if it did not center equity. And I remember her being very strong in that and saying, listen, it has to, right? Because we see what's happened in other states. You know, you think about Colorado and, you know, what's happened there. And when you're not centering the conversation around people who have impacted, you know, like were impacted from the past, then what are you really doing, right? You're just reinforcing existing inequity in a space that, you know, has a lot of history around people of color specifically, really being at the center of what that looked like in the past, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you know, whether you want restorative justice, equity, ultimately, so for example, the state has affirmative action policies, you know, but one specifically is in procurement. If you want to be, if you get certified as a minority or woman-owned business, you can get access to getting certified, and then that gives you an opportunity to win contracts basically with the state, because the state, you know, is a large, you know, buyer of things, right? And so, in the, you know, with cannabis, they basically, you know, took a equity model and really weave that into the fabric of, and that's not something that's easy to do. I mean, you're, and the assembly member basically, you know, rightfully says it, is anything that's affirmative policy, you're basically, when it comes to economics, you're basically taking money from one group and giving an opportunity to others. Right. Because this license is not a winning ticket. You have to operationalize a license. Right. You can be awarded something. You know, it's just like a diploma. You know, you get a degree, but you need to get a job too, right? Like you actually got to, you know, make a return on the opportunity and make good on the opportunity. What I think is interesting is how many people applied for the card license. So just to I was going to say, give some context around the card license and the importance of that. Yeah, so the best way I can put it is we applied for the card license program in September of 2022. Okay. I've told the story a lot of times, so it's pretty easy for me to recall. But I remember learning about the card program from the Office of Cannabis Management. They came to Buffalo in summer of 2022. Okay. And I think the majority leader was there at the time as well. And they basically gave an overview of the program. Full circle, I knew that I qualified for the program based upon my family's history in cannabis, and also the disproportionate impact of, you know, unjust, you know, police practices. Right. And I was mentioning earlier, I grew up in New York City. I grew up in 11234. It's a zip code. And again, kudos to the Office of Cannabis Management. They have an equity report where you can basically type in the zip code, and it'll show you the arrest data over multiple decades. And it really just kind of crystallizes that, you know, these zip codes were disproportionately, you know, targeted for enforcement. And so the fact that, you know, and I told my parents, you know, this is a huge opportunity, but, you know, it's something where it's like, you know, something's positive coming from those previous justices. And so that's a huge thing. And everybody's card license may have a different story. Some people may have served multiple years in jail. Some may have had one conviction for a small possession, whatever. But still, the ramifications of it is what, you know, that may have prevented from somebody from getting a job at writing or something. You don't know. And it may have prevented someone from getting a loan or you know, things like that. Or just ultimately stigmatizes some folks, and it kind of puts them in a category that's, you know, kind of uncomfortable. So we applied in September of 2022 after learning about the CARD program. So CARD, at the time, you know, stands for Conditional Adult Use Retail Dispensary. Okay. Spelled CAURD. And effectively, you had to have justice involvement, and whether it was yourself or someone in your family, but you also had to have 2 years of successful business tax returns. You had to be a successful business owner. Okay. That was another criteria. And that's one thing that I think is kind of lost is as people try to knock.
People don't talk about that piece. Yeah.
I'm going to be honest. I feel like people think about it as, oh, the state just gave a bunch of drug dealers a license. No, some of these people ran laundromats. Or whatever they did. Yeah. You know, they had to have legit tax returns. You know? I've had actually conversations with people who said I would have qualified for CARD, but I declared losses for 2 years in a row. Okay. Because they were trying to save, right? So it's like, well, you know, and you know, Fortunately, I didn't do that. I mean, but at the same time, that's, you have to be a successful business owner
Right.
in order to qualify for the program. It wasn't a handout, basically. If you, so that program, the license fee was $2,000.
Okay.
At the time. Now, at the time in September, we applied. I think later on we learned that more than 950 people applied.
Okay.
Out of that 900, now keep in mind there's 20.
And this is the application fee.
Right.
It's $2,000.
Correct.
So even if you got it or not, you're out of $2,000 to apply. That's good to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's 22-ish, 23 million people in the state. So you drill that down to 950 people that applied.
Right.
They awarded maybe 450 licenses.
Okay.
For Western New York, which is 8 counties. That includes Erie, Niagara, Chautauqua. I don't know the rest.
Right.
But it's 8 counties for Western New York. Includes like Rochester, Monroe County.
Okay.
But out of that, you had 54-ish people that were provisionally awarded.
Okay.
And of those, I don't believe all of them have operationalized their license.
Okay.
So out of 950 people that applied, we're able to get our approvals to open. So we applied in September of 2022. We were provisionally awarded in July of 2023.
Okay.
I remember it was a great moment because Mariah and I were eating some Caribbean food in Toronto, and I just happened to check my email, and I stepped out the car, did a little dance, and then Mariah was super excited.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I had to be a party pooper, and but I said Kobe Bryant, he always says, he has this famous phrase when he was up 2-0 in the finals. He said, the job's not finished, right?
Okay.
And then, and the reporter was like, why aren't you happy? And he's like, the job's not finished.
Yeah.
And he like rolled his eyes. You could just tell that he was like almost pissed that he was asked the question. But it's like, you gotta,
This is just the start, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So you got the license.
Right.
And now what?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So the state basically in July says the Cannabis Control Board is going to vote to approve your license.
Okay.
And then now, effectively, they basically give you a 1-year clock to operationalize your license.
Oh, so it's a year.
Right.
So within that year, you have to operationalize.
Right, you have to find a location. It's basically the state says, here's an approval to open up a restaurant.
Okay.
Go find a restaurant location.
Okay.
That's 200, 500 feet away from a school or church.
Right.
Et cetera, that meets the regulations, criteria.
Yeah.
Now, in July, we were awarded. Prior to July, there was lawsuits that took place.
I know there was an injunction that happened.
Yeah, Mariah and I, did a crash course on PACER and, looking up all of the court cases and, temporary restraining order, TRO,
Right.
Preliminary this and that. I actually went to the courthouse in Kingston County.
Okay.
When the injunction was first issued, because I just needed to get that primary data, like what in the world's going on. So I drove down there and kind of got a sense of what's going on. But effectively, when we applied in September of 2022, the state only really opened up a handful of stores in that first quarter.
Okay.
And then there was lawsuits up until when we got approved. And so we got approved in July of 2023. After that, I found a location that same week. I had a letter of intent. About 2 weeks after that, another lawsuit happened. And then that was the real, 4 to 6 month holding
Pause.
pattern.
Right. And for folks that might not know about that injunction and that lawsuit, it was someone trying to do business outside of New York State, right?
Yeah, generally, yeah, and obviously the internet's gonna fact check me, but like basically there was two I guess plaintiffs. I guess I don't defend it. Again, I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
But one was somebody who had a business in Michigan that basically said the state, based upon the dormitory clause, is prejudice against me.
Prejudice against me because I can't operate in your state.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the other was basically multi-state operators who were like, this is not what we want to see happen.
Right.
And so one was basically an attorney that has sued other states. Like the first one I think was the same person who sued other states when they did rollouts that were equity driven. And again, that's their right to sue, but I think it's one of those things where, obviously when you settle with people, it incentivizes them to sue you.
Sure.
Which is kind of like a catch-22. But I think ultimately what we did was we just stuck to operating and walking down the opportunity. So we got the letter of intent with the location. in July of 2023. The injunctions happened, but we still wanted to make sure that we had understanding of how to move forward. And so the Office of Cannabis Management, I think in November, December of 2023, then that's when they finally, there was some relief in the injunctions, and they had some sort of settlement, and then that allowed everybody who had locations and ultimately a plan to open up to move forward. And so September 2022, July 2023, we got our virtual inspections done in like February. Late January, early February of 2024 this year. And we got our approvals to open, I think, the first week in February. And so we've been open since, about a little bit more than 3 weeks, and we've had about 800 customers so far.
Wow.
And we have generally limited hours. We're open maybe 60 hours a week. Because again, Mariah and I, we both work full time, and so we're in Allentown. And for your listeners, that's it's your Buffalo listeners. That's they all know about Allentown Bar District. But people who aren't in Buffalo, it's an area where from 5 to midnight you can get a $50 steak from Billy Club. You can get some Mexican food from Casa Azul. You can go into some dive bars. You can go into a bar where there's like live reggae night down the street. And so there's a lot of it's a hopping entertainment street.
And walkable, very walkable.
Very walkable. And we've been super welcomed. And I think the big thing is just, we are the first minority women-owned dispensary licensed in the city of Buffalo. That's definitely a good feeling. But back to that Kobe phrase, the job's not finished. There's going to be more Black-owned, women-owned dispensaries that are going to open up in the city of Buffalo. I know of those that are going to open, and I'm excited for them. I'm looking forward to going to their openings and buying some product and supporting them, because I think that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Exactly.
Black equity is a real thing. I mean, in Buffalo, you may not see that as much, but there are entrepreneurs in the city of Buffalo who are willing to take a chance and open up a business. And so and the city of Buffalo is open for business. I mean, the city has been super helpful. But I think one of the things I would love to see is sharing this information. It's not about just sitting back and not helping others. I want to try to ensure that people who want to be in the cannabis space and the legal space have resources, and they know who to talk to, and they're not taken advantage of, and they're able to actually get across the finish line, because it's not easy, for sure. At
all. And I mean, I think any Black-owned business has their own challenges in opening and getting operated, but specifically in that realm and field. And I think the card program is really interesting because it talks about this equity model and how people who have been impacted by the justice system as it relates to marijuana and cannabis use are the ones that are at the forefront. Those are the ones that had the opportunity to apply. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about, like you talked about your connection to that specific program and how you've now been able to operationalize your own business through this lens. But can you just give us a little bit of a background around, what was your connection to being able to apply for the program?
Yeah, no, for sure. So again, my family, my dad, he owned multiple corner stores or bodegas, like, mid-90s up until like the early 2000s. And he would sell things that you can pay taxes on, and he sold things that you couldn't pay taxes on. And he did that, and he ran into some trouble that affected himself legally. It affected my mom, legally. Myself, I was always around people that sold cannabis, consumed cannabis. And I've had interactions or run-ins with law enforcement, but nothing that put me behind bars or anything like that, which is fortunate. And because I focused on going to school, I wanted to be in school, and I had friends that came from New York City that wanted to continue doing those things, and I would always tell them, like, that's always there. I was very intentional about leaving the city because I knew that the people that I was around, I probably wouldn't be in this chair right now. You know what I mean? I'll probably doing something, but I don't know if I would have been doing it, necessarily on the straight and narrow. I don't know if I would have been a tax-paying citizen. But I think in all seriousness, like, my family was effectively a victim of discrimination in law enforcement. I mean, like, you have bodegas and corner stores in Long Island and different neighborhoods where, I mean, if you look at the data, you know, black and brown communities are disproportionately over-policed. And, you know, I was just seeing something on YouTube just the other day where this white male is driving. He had like 50 pounds of marijuana in his car. You look at the farmers right now who are hurting in these legal states.
Yeah.
What are they doing? How is cannabis getting from Michigan, California?
Right.
They're driving it effectively or shipping it through the postal system and other carriers to New York State.
Yeah.
And back then in the 90s, you know, there was task forces created.
Sure. Specifically
for us.
Yeah.
And not necessarily for them. I mean, it's not, and it is what it is. I mean, you know, you know, in this, Hollywood can do a good job. I mean, you have the movie Black Klansman, right? You know, at the same time, you got a movie. I'm definitely gonna lose points, but with what's this guy's name? Oh my goodness, not The Harder They Fall. What's the name of the movie with the British guy from Get Out?
Ooh.
The actor. He was in I Am a Revolutionary, that movie. I don't know the name of it. I'm struggling right now.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
That movie,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
They had, I'm really blanking on his name. I know that.
Daniel, you talking about Daniel Kaluuya.
Right. But the person that he portrayed,
Fred Hampton.
My guy, I'm losing. You know, Fred Hampton, right? You know, I Am a Revolutionary, right?
Yeah.
They had task forces created by the FBI to go after Fred Hampton.
Right.
They had task forces to, you know, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, you know, and then the counter to that is, you know, the movie Black Klansman, where this guy had to basically infiltrate the KKK as an FBI agent, but nobody was hunting down the, you know, just and the reason I point that out is historically, Fred Hampton, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, disproportionate budgets attached to them.
Sure.
But you look at, you know, the violence against, you know, KKK or something like that, you know, not a lot of budgets allocated to enforcement on that side of things.
And I mean, that's a real connection in terms of what we just experienced in Buffalo, May 14th, you know, going on almost 2 years ago, right? Where there's a lot of conversations about the presence of,
what,
you know, white
rooms are y'all monitoring?
nationalism.
That's what I want to know.
You know, exactly, right? So that connection in itself is really interesting to that point. But getting back to your connection to it, right? Your parents having, you know, some issues that they had to navigate. Now you're in this position where you are the first Black, you know, adult use dispensary opening in Buffalo. And so what does that feel? I guess get into the feeling of it, right? Like, and how surreal of a moment that, I know you talked about that before, but how does that feel to be in this position and in this space at this point?
I mean, it's definitely humbling. I mean, I think I'm always an even keel individual ever since, you know, as long as I can, you know, recall. I never got too high, I never got too low. Like, you know, you win a basketball game, you're happy, but, you know, you're not like too happy like you're on top of the world. I think if anything, it's one of those things where definitely grateful and humble, but also I do have those moments where I'm like, you know, a Buffalo police officer or Erie County sheriff will come in and buy cannabis, or there's security companies where it's off-duty cops.
Okay.
You know, so the funny thing is, I look at the other people in the industry. So, for example, right now you have people driving across the state with THC products, vapes, concentrates, things like that. Obviously, it's all licensed. But I remember driving on the thruway with things, and then you're like, you're worried about troopers pulling you over. And I know friends who did the same thing. They're shipping things, they're driving things, and now you're like, there are people who are, you know, Chads and Brads, and, you know, you have some minorities in the space as well, but they're driving around, you know, like, for example, like if I get an inventory, we just got some inventory last week Friday, and sometimes I pinch myself like that, like I kind of make the joke, I'm just like, you guys are driving around with weed all day, huh?
Right.
And I'm like, but, you know, there are people who are doing that and they can't because it's licensed.
Right.
You know, it's illegal for them to do it without a license, and I think that's one of the things that kind of I pinch myself about.
Okay.
And I'm gonna be honest, I think without New York State having that equity model, we wouldn't be in a situation where we are now, where, you know, Mariah, we were just having a conversation with a cultivator in the store today, and it was one of those situations where they're saying, you know, we want to be on your shelves, or, you know, we're interested in carrying your products. This operator, they have ties to Colorado, for example.
Okay.
And so in Colorado, I don't believe it's an equity model, or there's not a lot of, I mean, historically, just looking at the data, I think like less than 1% is, you know, minority or minority women owned. And so, you know, Mariah is able to have conversations that we wouldn't be having if it wasn't an equity component. If anything, if it was on the other side, it would be a much more difficult to have conversation to have. Hey, we're a black-owned brand. We want to be on your shelves. You hope that people would treat you fairly, but historically, you don't always get treated fairly for whatever the reason. Our products got to be twice as good, but half as much. I guess I don't know, but I think that's interesting. I think there's definitely moments where I'm definitely happy, but I think honestly, and I've mentioned this to people, is the real success is being open in 2026.
Okay.
Right.
That's real.
Being open in 2026, reapplying for additional licensure, securing a second location, securing a third location, providing opportunities to people, and providing an example, possibly even going to other states. Who knows? But sharing that bandwidth with people who, because I was fortunate enough to have conversations with other black operators who are in Maryland, DC area, other states that are legal. And, there are people out there trying to make pathways. And so I look forward to kind of doing that. And I think it's an emerging economy. But I think it's important that, people are able to see that there is opportunity. It's a real opportunity.
Yeah,
for sure.
So I'm excited, right? I already paid y'all a visit. You gave me a gracious tour around, around the store and got to see it. But tell the people where you're at, right? So where can they find you in Allentown?
Absolutely. So it's at the corner of Allen and College Street, right across the street from Holly Farms, 232 Allen Street. If you go to Google Publicflower, we will come up, but it's publicflower.co.
Okay.
And we want to be able to help educate folks on, the different products that we have. We have flower, and we have pre-rolls, we have edibles, we have concentrates, bombs, tinctures. And one thing I would share is we're all right on Allen Street, but we'll have people. We had a 80-year-old couple that came in the store, 79-year-old and 82-year-old, and we'll have people who are 22 years old who come in. Yeah. And some people come in and they know exactly what they want. They'll say, I want the strongest sativa, you got the strongest indica. And some people, they've never heard those phrases before. Okay. But they are educated in the fact that they've had poor experiences with cannabis. I had a really bad effect or something like that. So it's good to help educate people on how to consume safely, going low and slow, things like that. So it's always helpful and rewarding to help educate people and provide them a space where it feels comfortable for them to learn. And you're not getting that in an illicit shop. You're not getting that in a smoke shop. And one of the things is when you buy from a legal dispensary, you're supporting your local tax base.
Okay.
Why? What does that mean? Cops get newer bulletproof vests. They get shinier cars.
Right.
Firefighters get new uniforms. In New York State specifically, I don't know the specific percentages, but I could be wrong, but the internet will correct me. I think it's like 40% goes to education.
Education, yep. I did hear that.
There's proportions of that that is reciprocal in a sense, and some of it is you're reinvesting. So, I kind of told somebody the other day, if you're supporting your illicit operator, he's taking his money, he's going to the Mercedes dealership. When you spend money in a licensed dispensary, that money is staying more locally, there's a lot more benefits, to local,
So you can essentially feel good while you're feeling good, right?
Absolutely.
Support through that lens and know that it's supporting things like education in your own backyard, and the list of things that you mentioned as well. So you mentioned location. What about on social media? And then maybe talk a little bit about, I think you can order online as well. So talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, no, for sure, Instagram, Publicflower, all one word. You can order online. You can view our whole menu. Like literally when you come in the store, we have QR codes that you can scan. It brings you to the website. Because a lot of times, we don't want to, be pushy salespeople because no one likes that pushy sales experience, period. And so we want people to take their time, really sort through and kind of see what's there. And then sometimes people have an idea and then they come and we kind of help them. And, make an informed decision. Because some people say, hey, I really like edibles. It's at this price point, but hey, if you buy a tincture, it's a little bit more, but you get more value out of it. Okay. So sometimes it's educating on that lens. But Instagram, Publicflower, definitely leave us a Google review if you're pleased with our service. That always helps us pop up on Google a little bit higher. Right. Publicflower.co. We're always adding to our menu, and that's the cool thing is curating that. Mariah does an excellent job. We have, for example, cowboy boot lighters with pink flames, things like that. If I make the joke, if it was up to me, it'll just be black and blue lighters and black and blue glands, but Mariah brings that, that flavor and spice to the equation. And it's reflected in our menu. We'll have pre-rolls that are called Miss Grass pre-rolls, fast time, quiet times. They're like little cute little packaging. Okay. Got a little box of matches in there, 5 little pre-rolls. And then we also have like different gummies and things like that. Some gummies have sugar on them, some don't have sugar on them. We have, for people who really know their flower, we have really strong sativas, strong indicas, strong hybrids.
Vegan options as well?
We do have vegan gummies. And this is vegan and gluten-free. And some of the gummies are fast-acting. And the good thing is everything is licensed and tested.
Right.
And so when you have a certificate of analysis, if you go to a cooking class with Jane or John Smith, and they're saying this is an infused dinner, you don't know what they're infusing it with. You don't know the percentages. And so sometimes I've had these conversations with customers, and they're like, again, we've had 800 customers, and it's kind of weird when I look at the data. But some of the people were like, yeah, they literally would say I had a cooking class situation, and I couldn't get home.
Okay.
But now it's like, hey, look, here's a 5 milligram gummy, here's a 10 milligram.
You know
gummy.
Exactly what you're gonna take.
If you have the 10 milligram gummy per serving, try half. Wait 30 minutes, see how you're feeling. If you're feeling groovy, finish the other half. If you're not,
and those are usually the stories that you will hear. Somebody is like, I tried it, nothing was happening, so I took more, within a small time frame, and then, the rest is history from that standpoint. But going to a dispensary, being able to talk to someone who is knowledgeable, you can really curate the experience that you want to have.
Absolutely.
One of the things that you had mentioned too is just the type of person that was coming in, to the store, right? 80-year-old couple, 20-year-old something. I think there's a lot of stigmas around the use of cannabis, and that is probably changing over time. It's changed a little bit, but what's the profile, I guess, of the customer? I know you just mentioned all these things, but what are you seeing mostly?
Yeah, it's a range. I mean, you have teachers, you have firefighters, cops, regular people who work at banks, that just, and you have some people, you have a mom of 3 who say, definitely got to I have to staple the bag because I don't want my kids looking in the bag.
Right.
You have, working professionals that are, doing regular jobs. And I think what's interesting is everybody has their own specific, need and base. I think one thing that's interesting is there's a movie, A Half-Baked, with Dave Chappelle.
Oh, yeah.
And there's certain scenes where he talks about cannabis customers. I always find that interesting is because you do get that variety, and you get the consistent, you get the regulars, and then you also get, like, for example, we had the Drake concert here in Buffalo. It was like last week, a lot of Canadians coming in. So there's definitely a variety. I think like the average age is maybe 30 to 40 maybe.
Okay.
But I think some of them are super advanced in their knowledge and their expertise and what they actually want. And some are just, hey, I just left Brick Bar, or I just left Billy Club, or I'm going to a show at Nietzsche's, or I just left Casa Azul, or I'm going to the Sabres game. I was thinking about some of these Sabres customers, or Bandits, like there's a certain game that's going on.
Yeah.
They'll be like, yeah, I just want a couple pre-rolls to smoke before, I get down to the game. So it's a variety. I mean, some people will come in, spend $30, some will spend $300. It just kind of literally just depends on that. But I think the good thing is they know that there's a space that's safe and they're able to consume. And I think, just like variety-wise, we have eighths that are low as $34 out the door to as much as $68 out the door.
Okay.
We have drinks that are $4 that are really good, that have 10 milligrams of THC, and we have cases that you get for $16. So prices aren't super high.
Right.
And we definitely want to welcome people and make sure that they know that they can have a space where they can be seen and feel like people are getting good service.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on and talking about your store. Hopefully folks who are interested can reach out. You're knowledgeable about this, about the process as well. Go stop by the store.
Info at publicflower.co is on our website. Drop an email, shoot us a text. We're more than happy to talk to folks. Again, it's I'm definitely grateful, to be the first one, but I don't want to be the last one.
Right.
And I'm not. There's gonna be other black and brown people that open up, but we want to try to make sure that more and more people understand that there's a way to get into the legal space.
Absolutely.
The last thing we need is more people going to jail or facing fines for things when they can get into the legal market.
Right.
Like we can connect you with the attorneys that we use, consultants. I have that consulting background, so I don't have a problem kind of doing a 30-minute conversation with somebody.
Sure.
And so I think, definitely.
So y'all heard, y'all reach out to get some more information. And lastly, we always ask our guests, drop a gem of the day, a gem of the week, something that you're thinking about. What do you want to leave the people with?
I would definitely say you want to know what's important versus know what's urgent.
Okay.
Kind of prioritizing your task and overall just hierarchy of priority. I think that's huge.
Yeah.
Important versus urgent. And
Okay.
and obviously there's a time sensitivity that kind of differentiates that. But I think, understanding that and definitely, just, whatever you're doing, make sure that you're as patient as possible and have more of have some short-term goals, but also have some long-term goals, and definitely be patient. And I think that's definitely helped me determining what's important versus what's urgent.
Awesome.
Sure.
Sometimes it feels like everything's, urgent and everything's important, and so I like the nuance of the difference of those.
Yeah,
two.
you got to. Sometimes you got to take the time to really understand it. I mean, obviously, again, the times if something's due on a Monday and it's Sunday, yeah, that's urgent, right? But it's it's also there's categories to it, right? Like, if your boss's boss's boss at work sends you an email, that's one thing. But I think that prioritizing your task is super important. And we're as entrepreneurs, as people who work full time, or you have a lot going on. That's super important. So
Absolutely.
Make sure that you're able to kind of delegate and kind of have a certain hierarchy of your task, for sure.
I can appreciate that. That's something that I'm still working on, as an entrepreneur. But thank you for coming on. I know Kendra sends her regards in terms of not being able to be here, but super excited for you. Can't wait to see what's to come.
Yeah.
Everybody, y'all, go visit Publicflower on Allen Street and check out the website, check out Instagram, get in touch with Sheldon. But thank you for coming on again. This has been another episode of the Black Gems Dive In Podcast. Peace.